What's up everybody, and welcome to part 3 of my Git tutorial series. In the previous video we have seen how to inspect the commit history of an already existing project, and in this video we're gonna see how we can create such a commit history in the first place. So how we can create commits. And the project that we're going to version control is actually the tic-tac-toe game that we've seen in the previous video. So if you want to follow along, then check out again this Git tutorial folder that we downloaded in the previous video. And in that there's a folder called supporting materials. And in that folder there is a file called code snippets. And this file contains the code snippets that I'm going to use throughout the rest of this tutorial. Okay, so now to be actually able to start creating commits, we first have to set some configurations in Git. So let's open up the command line again. I'm using git bash, and now to set the configurations we use the command git config, and with that we use the option global. And this option simply ensures that we only have to set those configurations once. After that, they are then stored. And the things that we have to configure are the username and the email of the user. And that's because Git has to know who the creator of a commit is. So then we say simply user.name, and then in quotation marks we can put then in our name. So I'm using my name obviously. So that's the first configuration, and then the other one is the email address. So let's use that. So user.email, and here you can then put in your email if you want to or not. So I'm just saying you@example.com, and that's already it, what we have configured. So now we can start version controlling our project. So therefore let's create a new folder for that. Let's call this folder tic-tac-toe. Okay, so then let's open up the folder, and now let's go into that folder into within our command line. So cd desk and then tic-tac-toe. So now we are in that folder, and now we need to initialize Git to version control this folder. And the command for that is simply git init. And if I now run this command, then Git will automatically create this .git folder, which is the repository which is going to contain the commit history. So with that, now we have initialized Git to version control this folder. And we can also see that here in the command line, namely there's now, it states master in parentheses. So we are currently on the master branch, which is again automatically created by Git. So now we can finally start creating our first commit. So let's say that in our first coding session we create a readme file and a helper functions.py file. So let's create here a new file, and let's save this. And this is going to be the readme, and it's going to be a markdown file. So let's save it into our tic-tac-toe folder. So let's bring that to this side. And in the readme, we first just give it a title, give our project a title, and there are then some bullet points explaining the objectives of our project. So let's save this file, and then let's create another one. And this file is going to contain the functions, the helper functions that we're going to need for the tic-tac-toe game. So let's call this then simply helper functions.py. And here in our first coding session, let's say we create or we hard code the game board, which is simply a list of lists which should represent the tic-tac-toe game board. And then we also create the first helper function. So let's copy this into here. And whenever I copying something from this code snippets file, you can then pretend as if we have just encoded that. Okay, so then let's see what this show function actually then looks like. So this function simply prints the game board to the command line. So let's have a look what that looks like. Therefore, let's just print the game board as it is. And then let's use our show function. So let's save that. Then let's go to the command line and let's run this file. So we're going to say python helper functions.py. So here at the beginning, if I just print out the game board as it is, then it looks like this. So it's just in one line. And after that, this is what our show function outputs. So that's that function. So let's delete these lines here again. So now let's say this was our first coding session, and now we are satisfied with our progress so far, and we would like to save that into a commit. Before we do that, however, let's first have a look at another command, which is git status. And what that does is it gives us some information about the 3 areas that we are working with here, right? So let's run this. So here it says on branch master, which you can also see on the parentheses. Then it says no commits yet, because we haven't created anyone yet. And then it says untracked files. And then here it lists the files that are untracked now, which is the readme and the helper functions.py file. So referring back to the slide here, this looks now like this, where in the working directory we have the readme and the helper functions.py listed. And then git gives us also information what we need to do next. Namely, we need to use the command git add to start tracking those files. And this is something that you can keep in the back of your mind, that namely that Git generally does a good job at giving hints what you need to do next. So what we want to do now is we want to stage those 2 files. So therefore then we simply say git add, and then we list the things that we want to add to the staging area. So that would be then the readme and helper functions.py. So if I now run this, then we have added those to the staging area. So let's run git status again. So now it says, well, first of all, they are now listed in green, and it says those are the changes that are to be committed. So in terms of these slides, now we have moved those 2 files into the staging area. And now we want to make a commit out of those 2 files. And the command for that is simply git commit. And if I open the text editor again, and if I now run this, this will then open up a new tab in our editor. And here we can then write down our commit message. So what we can do here is at the first line, we can give it, so to say, a title. So let's just call this initial commit. And then we can, if we leave an empty space, then we can write the next paragraph where we might, or that, so to say, represents the body of our message, where we can go into more detail if you want to. So here we can then say create draft stage readme, and maybe also create first helper function. Then let's save this tab here and then simply close that. And with that now we have created our first commit. So let's run git log again to see that commit. And here, as you can see, we have our initial commit, and here is the more detailed explanation, so the body of the message. So now let's look at this log with the option one line. So here you can then see that there's only the title of the commit message. And now let's run finally also git status again. And now it says we are still on branch master, and then it says nothing to commit. So there's now currently nothing in the staging area, and also the working tree is clean. So the working directory is clean, so there are no changes. So in terms of the slides, what we've done here, we have created our first commit, which is the initial commit, and then the working directory in the staging area are now clean. So there's nothing in there anymore. And that concludes the first example of creating a commit. Okay, so now let's look at a second example for creating commits. So let's say in our second coding session, we finish up the README. So we are using full sentences instead of bullet points. So let's save that. And then we also gonna create the second helper function, which is called change. And with that function, we can make a move on the game board and thereby change the game board. So let's see what that looks like. So let's show the game board first. Then we're gonna change that. And the player is gonna be player number 1, and then show the game board again. Okay, let's save this and then let's run this file again. So I'm gonna say Python helper functions.py. So this is what the game board looks like in the beginning, and then player 1 is asked which position he or she wants to play. So let's take position 1-1, and after that we again show the game board, and now there's a 1 on position 1-1. Okay, so that's that function. So let's delete this here again. So now let's say we are satisfied with what we've done in our coding session, and now we want to create commits out of our progress. So therefore, let's run git status again. And as we can see, the README and the helper functions.py are listed as having been modified. So they are now listed in the working directory. And now we can use the git add command to add them to the staging area. But this time we're not going to stage both of these files, and that's because the changes that we've made in those files, they don't really have anything to do with each other. So they are kind of independent of each other, and therefore we want to create commits for both of these changes, because both represent a meaningful change in our project. So therefore, let's first just add the README to the staging area. So git add README. And now let's run git status again. So now the README is in the staging area, and helper functions.py is still in the working directory. So now we could create a commit, but before we do that, I want to make you aware of this other command here that git gives a hint for, namely git restore. And this we can use to move files out of the staging area or out of the working directory. So if we would use this command with the staged option, and then name the file that we want to unstage, then we would, in this case, then could unstage then the README file and move it back into the working directory. And if we want to move things out of the working directory, then we simply use git restore and then mention the file that we want to restore. In this way, then we would discard the changes that we have in our working directory. Okay, so now let's create our next commit. So we're gonna say git commit, but this time we use another option for that commit, which is -m, which stands for message, and this allows us to directly here in the command line type in our commit message. This, however, will then only be the commit title, so to say. So if you want to have a more detailed message, then you should probably just use the git command without the -m option, and then write your message in the editor. But since that is now a fairly easy commit, so let's just use the -m option. So let's say here that the commit message is simply update readme, and that's already enough. So let's commit that. And now if you run git status again, we can see that only helper functions.py is left. So now let's add that to the staging area. And then let's create a commit. So we're going to say -m, and here we say define the function change. So that are our commits. Let's now run git log again. And here are our 3 commits. And as you can see here, we only have, so to say, our commit title. So let's run the git log command again with the 1-line option. And here now you can see the 3 commits that we have created so far. And this concludes the second example for creating commits. So let's look again at the slides to see what we have done. So first, we made our changes to the readme and helper functions.py. Then we added the readme to the staging area and created a commit for that. And then we added the helper functions to the staging area and then also created a commit for that. Okay, so that was the second example. So let's now have a look at a third example for creating commits. So let's say in our next coding session, we create another helper function, which is called determine game status, and that simply determines if there is a winner, so horizontal, vertical, or diagonal winner, or if the game is still ongoing. And it simply returns the result as a string. So let's add that to helper functions.py, and then let's also say we create another function. And here we decide that we actually don't want to hard code the game board, but instead we want to create a function with which we can create a game board of variable size. So we're going to replace this game board here with this create initial game board function. And to see what it looks like, let's create a game board with our create initial game board function. Then we're going to show that game board, and then let's create another game board and show that again. Okay, so let's save that, and then let's run the file. So now we are gonna, the create initial game boards function asks us how many rows and columns the game board should have. So if you take the traditional size of 3, then the game board looks like this. And now let's create a game board with, for example, 5 rows and columns. Then the game board would look like this. So that's what the create initial game board function does. So now let's say that we are satisfied with our progress and we would like to create some commits. And since those 2 functions that we've built in this session aren't really related to each other, we would like to put them also accordingly into separate commits. But if we run the git status command again, then we can see that obviously only helper functions.py is listed as modified in the working directory. So if you would now add this file to the staging area, then the next commit would contain both of these functions, and that's not what we want to do. So what we actually want to do is we want to be able to just stage a part of this file. Namely, first we just want to stage this create initial game board function, and we can do that again with the git add command, but here we then use the patch option. This will then list the part of the code that Git thinks comprises a hunk. So what Git thinks belongs together. So in this case, then here it's the game board, the hard-coded game board was erased and then replaced by the create initial game board function. And then here at the end, Git asks us or lists the different options that we can use for this question. And here at the end is a question mark. So let's use that to see what these options actually mean. And here you can see Y is yes, stage this hunk, and N is no, do not stage this hunk. So since this is here what we want to stage, since we want to stage the create initial game board function, let's type a Y here. And here, just as a side note, I want also to highlight this E option here. This allows us to manually edit the current hunk. So sometimes Git doesn't recognize what code belongs together, or is just one hunk that you want to stage. For example, if I would have added both of these functions at the end of the file, then they would have been put together into one hunk. In that case, then you can use the E option to manually edit the hunk. But in our case, it recognized it. So let's type Y. Then it lists the next hunk, which is our determine game status function, and that we obviously then don't want to stage. So that's now that. And now let's run git status again. So now, as you can see, helper functions.py is listed 2 times, namely as not staged, which would be the determine game status function, and as staged, which is our create initial game board function. So now we can create our commits. But before we do that, I want to revisit a command that we've seen in the previous video, which is git diff. This we can't just use to compare different commits with each other, but we can also use it to see what changes we are currently having in our staging area or in the working directory. So if you use this command with the option staged, then it will show us the changes that we have in the staging area, which again is our create initial game board function. And if we just say git diff, then we will see what changes we have in our working directory, which is the determine game status function. So just to recap that, so when you use git diff with the stage option, then it compares what is in the staging area compared to the most recent commit, so the differences. And if you just use git diff, then it shows the difference between the working directory and the staging area. And if there's nothing in the staging area, then the difference between the working directory and the checked out commit. Okay, so that's that. Let's now create our commits. So again, currently we have the create initial game board function in our staging area. So let's say then commit, git commit, and then our message is enable variable size of the game board. Okay, so that's that. So let's now run git status again. So now only helper functions.py is in the working directory, and that's the determine game status function. So let's also add that to the staging area, and then let's create a commit for that. So commit, and here then we say define determine game status function. Okay, so that are our commits. So let's run git status again to see that the working directory and the staging area are clean. So now let's run git log, and here are now our 5 commits. So that concludes the third example for creating commits. And let's recap what happened again here with the slides. So first we created our 2 functions. So then the help function.py was listed in the working directory. then we only staged part of that file, and we created commit with that, and then we staged the rest of the file and also created a commit for that. So now we have seen 3 different examples for creating commits, and hopefully these 3 examples showed how we can use the staging area to create commits that represent a meaningful change in our project history. So namely, what we've done in the first example, we have staged several files, in the second only 1 file, and in the third then only part of 1 file. So, and now we are at the end of this video, and the commands that we have used are listed here. So those are the commands for creating commits, and here are 2 additional commits that we've also used in this video. So now we have seen how we can create commits. So in the next video, we're gonna see how we can work with branches in Git. So thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.